Hello, and welcome to All Things Chemical, a podcast produced by Bergeson and Campbell, a Washington, D.C. law firm focusing on chemical law, business, and litigation matters. I'm Lynn Bergeson. I was delighted this week to visit again with Alexandra Dunn, President and CEO of CropLife America, and my colleague Jim Aidala, to discuss some of the issues facing the crop protection industry. As many of our listeners know, Alex's amazing career has prepared her well for this very demanding job. After graduating from law school and a brief stint in private practice, Alex served as general counsel for the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, then on to becoming the executive director and general counsel of the Association of Clean Water Administrators. Alex then went on to serve as executive director and general counsel of the Environmental Council of the States. After that, in 2018, Alex was nominated to serve as EPA Region 1, that's New England, administrator, and was later appointed to be assistant administrator of EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention in 2019, where she served until 2021. Alex returned briefly to private practice here in Washington, D.C., before becoming, in 2024, president and CEO of CropLife America. More recently, Alex was appointed last year by the United States Department of Agriculture to serve on the Agricultural Policy Advisory Committee for Trade. And as if this were not enough, Alex has served as chair of the American Bar Association section of Environment, Energy, and Resources, dean of environmental law programs at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University, and is now current president of the American College of Environmental Lawyers, and has served on the board of directors of the Environmental Law Institute. Whew! Sounds like 2 lifetimes. My colleague Jim is equally well-credentialed. He is senior government consultant here at Bergeson and Campbell, and like Alex, a past assistant administrator of the EPA's Toxics Office, now known as OSCPP. Alex, Jim, and I discuss agriculture and trade policy, how CropLife America has been addressing MAHA issues, crop protection and agricultural chemical communication issues, some pesticide registration challenges, preemption, and even some Endangered Species Act issues. We pack a lot into this podcast. Now, here's my conversation with Alex Dunn and Jim Aidala. Alex, it is so great that you're able to join us today. Jim and I have been looking forward to this podcast.
Well, I am so happy to be here with you, Lynn, and Jim, 2 of my favorite pesticide people in the world. And, there aren't as many pesticide people in the world as there should be.
Well, I agree. It's such a fascinating topic, and we have so much ground to cover today. Why don't we jump right in? And before we do, for those in our audience, in our listening audience, who may not know as much about CropLife America as Jim and I do, maybe you can give just a very brief idea of who your members are and what role they play in U.S. agriculture.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking and the chance to describe the organization. So, CropLife America is the national trade association for the pesticide industry. We like to say pesticides very proudly. I always say that, we have to use this word because it is the word that is used by entities that don't like the products that we make. And so we say pesticide, they say pesticide. That way we can go toe to toe on facts and have a good conversation and be out there in the public space, having a conversation about the value of our products, which we think are incredibly valuable because they drive innovation. So our members collectively discover, produce, sell, and distribute the essential pesticide products that empower America's farmers to produce the food, fuel, and fiber for our nation and also support a very robust export market. They help growers protect their crops from weed, pests, and disease, and help us have safe, affordable, and abundant food here in the United States. And we've been around for almost 100 years. I don't have to start planning a
Wow.
party quite yet, but soon,
But soon,
soon,
right?
under many different names and through a lot of different eras of agriculture. And just as agriculture has become more sophisticated and the challenges that agriculture faces have become more complex, CropLife America has continued to evolve right alongside the field of agriculture and ensuring that we have grown and adapted. But we've always been about science-based regulation and partnership with the grower community. And we are excited to be part of the American economy. We're excited to be part of the global economy, and also you may not know that our member companies' products are used also to protect the health of Americans' homes as well as
Right.
their workplaces and sanitation. So um, we have a sister association here at CropLife America called RISE. RISE focuses on the specialty sector, which would
Mhm.
include ornamental uses of herbicides, insecticides, turf grass, golf courses that might be appreciated by someone particularly in power right now, and also control things like mosquitoes for public health, Lyme disease, invasive plants, aquatic weeds. So anything that's not in the ag space, RISE will focus on the advocacy for. So we really cover the all uses of these products and even wildfire control.
Mhm.
Sometimes people don't think about the fact that herbicides play an important role in controlling all of that underbrush and keeping it from getting so overgrown that we risk wildfire risk.
Yeah, and Alex, don't forget ticks because ticks, people think
Yep.
about the mosquitoes, but here we in Michigan, for good news, bad news, we've been thinking about ticks a lot lately, so they're starting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and sometimes being able to connect with people about an insecticide through a home use is a way that you might help them understand why a farmer might use a product on a larger scale in agriculture because most people will say, "Oh, I've used, an ant spray at home when I've got ants in my kitchen, or after the
Mhm.
rain when they come marching in the front door like they own the place." And most people don't think twice about, spraying something around their front door. And I'll say, "Well, after you spray the front door where the ants are, do you go up and spray your master bedroom?" And they look at me, "Well, why would I do that?" And I said, "Well, just like a farmer, they're gonna use the product where they have a problem with a pest, or a weed, but they're not gonna use it where they don't have a problem, right? Just the way you do at home. So it's the same. And then people kinda their eyes open up and they say, "Oh, all right, I understand a little more what you might be talking about."
Well, I'm so glad that both of you mentioned the public health aspect of pesticides. We always make that a part of our advocacy because the use of agrochemicals is useful in and around the home, in farms, and of course for our farmers and food and crop production. But the public health dimension is hugely, hugely important, and we're always quick to remind people that that's part of the pesticide scenario as well. Alex, you've been CEO at CropLife for just a little bit over 2 years now, and I took the liberty, earlier before we started the podcast of giving our audience just a brief glimpse of your incredibly diverse and storied career. So, what part of your career has prepared you best for your current role, as challenging as it is?
That's a great question, Lynn. I would say, 2 pieces of my career. One, I would say the working at Ecos and Aqua and
Mhm.
managing organizations from a CEO level. I mean, there is a part of being at CropLife where you are running a business, just as you do, right? And
Yeah.
you've got to balance the books and make sure that you're taking care of your people. And we are a 38-person organization of talented staff, and we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the changing economy and cost of healthcare and all the things that you have to do in a small business. So I think really learning as a someone trained as a lawyer over time, learning how to run businesses has been
Mhm.
extremely beneficial. But then really at the policy side, it's the work that I did in almost every role. I think talking about difficult subjects, so from chemicals at American Chemistry Council to sewage when I worked with NAQUA,
Mhm.
and aqua and water to working on the Hudson River where I met RFK Jr., who now we are in very different roles today. Who would imagine?
But you've
But
got some history, I forgot about
we
that.
do, we do. We meet again, um, in very, very, unique
Different roles.
different roles, but, common roots in the Hudson and the cleanup
Mhm,
there. But, talking about things that are difficult and then trying to bring disparate views together in a room and make good policy out of difficult decisions
mhm,
and uncertainty where there's uncertainty. And I think when you're dealing with science, there's always going to be a bit of uncertainty. And there's a sense, I think, in our world that we're only going to make a decision once and we'll never come back to it, and it's final and it has to be perfect. And I think some of the best results that I've seen in my roles, whether at EPA or at ECOS or when I was at Aqua or NAQUA, were working with organizations where you built trust
mhm,
across the table and then said, "We don't have perfect science right now, but we have enough science to make a good decision for the moment. And we can come back to it if we learn more. And if we learn that one of our assumptions was just flawed, and that doesn't happen as often as we think it might, right? And so bringing that forward, I think, has allowed me to push towards results. Um, and that gets harder and harder, given the divisiveness
right, how
of
everything is
of
so
the
polarized.
policies around agriculture. We are
Mhm,
I look back earlier in my career, I mean, I worked on Superfund. That was pretty sticky. I
mhm.
don't know if it was more sticky than what we're doing today, but I don't think anything I've worked on has been ever, an easy home run. But I
Well, I
guess
think
that builds tenacity.
And
you're,
Alex, well, let me
go ahead, Jim.
yeah, sorry to interrupt there, Lynn.
Mhm,
Um, the word sewage is very interesting and not very cute, but it's more that, okay, you have to explain to people because sewage is one of the classic things, but just get it out of here. Or why does it exist to begin with, right?
right.
And then especially at Ecos, you had to deal with all 50 states. Some states do blank, fill in the blank, whatever noun you want to have, fill in the blank. Some states do it better than others, whatever that was or is.
Mhm.
And so how did you find, the lessons that some states have a better time at explaining their regulatory approach, their regulatory decisions? And is that something that, again, you and I both have worked at EPA at positions of authority and honor. And so, and again, some days you have good days and some days you have bad days. And that's a little bit of what underneath what you just said. And so, how do you learn from all those other things? There's one thing you have that most people don't here in Washington is all that state experience, right? And because at Ecos, you didn't just have a state experience. In a sense, you were the den mother of 50 states. And so, what were some of the lessons there that helped you with trying to with herding cats in Washington to mix my metaphors?
Well, and Jim, I was just over at EPA a few weeks ago, and I got to walk down the hallway uh, in where the chemical office is, and I saw your smiling face on the wall, and I, I I think we're just separated by about 4 or 5 photos. So it's always great to walk that hallway and see. I was with a couple of farmers, and they were like, "Oh, you really are someone, Alex. Your picture's on the wall in this federal building." I'm like, "Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I wasn't kidding. I really had a job here." Um,
Right, and
so
Some
unlike
credibility.
the cabinet level people at the front door, you don't end up with your photo in the trash if you get kicked out or leave at
that's
the end of
right,
the
that's right. We get to stay
demonstration.
on the wall. We get to
That's
stay on
right.
the wall. Um, so, I think that's a great question. What I learned working with states and even serving as Region 1 administrator for a year is that you have to look for the the sort of the diamond in the rough in every state. And you have your states that always kind of appear to be the shiny, perfect, 10-carat diamond, right? That always are like, we are the epitome of what it means to protect, to regulate, your Californias, your New Yorks, your, Washington states, your Minnesota, Maines, and they always, leap to the front of the pack and say, we are we are your 10-carat diamond, we're the best. But then, over time, I found that the ones that were quieter and wouldn't really leap to the front, if you scratched the surface just a bit, you'd find a diamond in the rough and find that actually, for example, the state of Mississippi had a wonderful program for tracking environmental justice sites. And they didn't brag on their program and they didn't say they thought it was the best and they didn't have something like California, like a Cal Enviro screen. Um, but they had a really effective program for Mississippi that flagged sites that were proximate to communities of color that had histories um, of conflict with the industrial operation and the people living nearby. And so I guess, Jim, to answer your question, it's never assume that just because a state isn't, like a kid in the classroom, the one that always raises their hand and says, me, I've got the answer, right? I learned over time that really you just have to kind of call on that quieter kid in the classroom and say, "Do you have something to offer?" And you'd find that almost every state had something to bring to the conversation. It's just that some of them thought, "Well, we just don't stack up next to a New York or a California. We'll just be quiet." And yet we did a lot of 50 state inventories at ECOS. And those are my favorite projects because they kind of forced us to delve into each state and recognize that success doesn't look the same for every state. Success looks different in each state. And and I think when we talk about pesticide regulation and how states are managing and working with their farmers and educating their farmers on different techniques and doing outreach around ESA and some of these new policies, that's why having support for state programs is so important because it lets each state, as was it Ronald Reagan who said, "Let 1,000 flowers bloom" or whatever. Let them grow and do their thing because it's what works for Alabama is not going to work for Washington State. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, well, speaking of Secretary Kennedy, with the Make America Healthy Again movement, aka MAHA, pesticides have been kind of thrust into the front page. Even the president on the campaign trail mentioned pesticides with some regularity, which is pretty unusual. I'm sure you would agree. How has CropLife America been addressing MAHA issues and the administration writ large? I'm sure that's been a primary topic of conversation of late.
Oh, you're spot on, Lynn. I'll say at the beginning, um, it was a bit surprising to have the President of the United States talking about pesticides and knowing that Secretary Kennedy would come in with a very strong
Mhm.
personal history of litigating against many of the active ingredients made by our member companies. There was no doubt that pesticides would be front and center, but we didn't exactly know what shape it would take given that HHS, where Secretary Kennedy um, took his seat, does not have direct regulatory authority over pesticides. That's over at the EPA. So there was a bit of a wait and see, and we didn't have to wait long. The MAHA Commission formed,
Early
and
on.
yes, the day that Secretary Kennedy was sworn in, the MAHA Commission was created. He was put at the helm, and it was very clear that MAHA would be something that would be a household word for us, and it has been. And we support the MAHA community's effort to improve access to affordable, nutritious food for every American family.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't think any one of us or any one of our companies would disagree with the core value that we should all be eating healthier, we should all be eating good whole food, and we are very fortunate in this country to be able to grow enough food to be food secure. However, why we are food secure is because we prevent food loss and crop loss. And we prevent crop loss through the use of herbicides and insecticides and fungicides. And so therein lies a bit of the tension with the MAHA movement. Um, yes, a healthy America needs a healthy food supply with fresh fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are some of the most vulnerable to pest attack. Um, we know that our row crops are weed, um, they're like weed magnets. We look at the new food pyramid with, I would say the turkey at the top. Well, that turkey needs grain to grow and become the protein that we want American families to have access to, and we want the food to be affordable. We don't want a healthy diet full of protein and fresh fruit and fresh vegetables to be inaccessible to someone on a limited income. And so all of that means that we have to grow in volume because basic economics, right? The fewer of something that there is, the more expensive it becomes. And so the more abundant our food productivity is in the United States, the lower the price can be for all of us. And so we are, this is where I bring, I think, some of my history of working with um, organizations that might not really align with who I work for and trying to find that common space where we can work together and help the MAHA community see that there's a lot of misunderstandings around pesticides. Some of the perceptions are rooted in past uses, products that may not be on the market today. I have a copy of Silent Spring. I know that there are um, concepts and visions of agriculture that are not what we see out in the field today. And part of how we moved forward with the MAHA Commission in 2025 was through a very intentional education process with the leaders and the writers of that report who were working with Secretary Kennedy, bringing them to farms, meeting with them, with farmers, and having the farm groups, Farm Bureau, um, the corn growers, soybean, fresh fruit and vegetable, meeting with them to talk about what it really looks like to help them achieve their goals. And I have to say that today, I think we are in a better place. Um, I'm I think we still have a long journey with the MAHA movement, but we're not where we were in the beginning of 25.
Well, that's good to hear, Alex, and two thoughts come to my mind, and then, Jim, you might wanna respond as well. One aspect of your storied career, Alex, is your teaching. You were dean of environmental, law programs at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. You are adjunct professor at various law schools here in the DC area. So I imagine that your teaching skills and communication skills have been put to good use. And in that regard, the second thought is, do you find in your role as CEO that decision makers and policymakers generally have a really good understanding of the rigorous review program and the governance systems that apply to agricultural chemicals, or is that something that you find you are often having to mention and educate as to the rigors of the program?
I will say that there is, from the decision maker standpoint, there's often a lack of familiarity of how pesticides are regulated.
Right.
Um, Often not knowing which federal agency would have responsibility for it. Is it at USDA? Is it at HHS? Often, if you asked for a vote, I don't think EPA would rise to the top, actually. I think
No
USDA might
kidding.
be the one getting the votes. And I think that, it comes through in the fact that there's been so much urbanization of the population and I once in a while check statistics on how many members of Congress um, of the 535 actually identify as having a farming background or being associated with farming, and it's a very small percentage. Um, and I think that that creates opportunities for us. Our lobbying team through the PREA coalition makes visits every other week to urban members of Congress decision makers essentially to talk to them about FIFRA. We do FIFRA 101s. I think Jim has been a part of helping with, and I'm helping with the curriculum, which is just, take half an hour to say, these are highly regulated. They take a long time to come to market. It's one in thousands that even get to become an active ingredient.
Right.
And what does EPA do? And then after EPA reviews it and approves it, then it's registered at the state level. Just going through that whole process and really trying to connect these decision makers at the federal level, but also at the state legislative level, where we see a lot of bills popping up every legislative season. We're almost done with the state legislatures. I think there's about 3 in session still. But um, in 2025, the state legislative season, there were 781 pieces of legislation introduced across the United
Wow.
States that were to restrict pesticides in some way, either by class of pesticides, by use, like you can't use it near a school or you can't use it in a park, or you can't use this type of pesticide like a neonicotinoid, or after this date, this type of pesticide can no longer be used in this state, but there's no alternative identified for the farmers. So there's all different ways that the state legislatures write these bills, and the people writing them are generally using a piece of misinformation about the pesticide that
Mhm.
doesn't come from the grower. And so we have a real opportunity to, weigh in as people who work with growers, and we try to do these visits with farm groups and crop life. If we come in as the innovation companies, the pesticide companies, we probably will not be as effective as when we come in with grower groups together.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I can see that.
And,
and yeah.
Alex, and this is exactly what you're talking about with those Hill 101 visits that CLA does, but I just remember, one of the best jobs I ever had was Congressional Research Service, right? Support staff to House and Senate, both parties, nonpartisan, and I had the honor of being the desk officer for FIFRA and TSCA, pesticide and chemical regulation, and then the then pesticide lobbyist would come up to the Hill office and say, this is good, this is bad, whatever they're lobbying on whatever issue of the day. This is literally in the 80s. And and then, the staff would nod knowingly, and hope that they didn't, show their lack of what the heck was being talked about, and then they'd call CRS. They call CRS as soon as you leave the office, that lobbyist leaves the office and say, "What's all this stuff about FUFRA?" The word should be FIFRA, right? And so, he then would explain it, and even back when, long before I dealt with any particular pesticide company, pesticide issue, and things like that, trying to explain, well, here's what the law is, here's what EPA does. I had the additional honor of working at EPA in the bowels of the system, starting out as a summer intern, as a GS9 in the front office for the then assistant administrator under Jimmy Carter, and I do go that far back. So, anyway, and the point is that here's all the data that have to be generated. It's because of an incident back in the 70s. The data is now what we call GLP, good laboratory practices. So yes, it's industry generated, but it's, shall we say, very honest. It's international standards. You have to keep those samples around for 30 years in the freezer, or maybe longer, it might be 40, in order to be able to evaluate the safety long after EPA's made a decision. You talked about before, you might want to correct a decision later on. Well, it helps to have those samples of all the animal data, 40 years in take. You mentioned about spraying underneath the sink, or maybe in the bedroom and things. EPA has data about all that stuff, as all that stuff. My favorite was, well, what if my child's on the lawn, or, given that there's a lawn chemical that was approved by EPA? Are there studies about that? Yeah, there's studies about that, and there's studies about how much clothing the child might have, because obviously in hot weather you have less, you might have more skin absorption, the potential for that, and that's all that's just a small part of the information you have on a pesticide approval that EPA has to go through. You can disagree with it, you can agree with what they do with it, but that data is there, and pretty much publicly available. The super confidential stuff is CBI, but most all those studies and things are broadly available for the public, and people can and will and do argue about it, but it's there for the review of the public and for the obviously the regulator, and that's the basis of that regulatory decision.
I mean, you're right, Jim. There's so much data that underlies these decisions. And, that's really what we want to try to do is bridge the gap between, you know, people hearing that, pesticides are somehow harmful or being used recklessly, or that the EPA is somehow captured by the industry that it regulates, and try to break down that misunderstanding, and instead, provide an alternative understanding to say, no, this agency is actually objective. They use science, and it takes quite some time. It takes such a long time that I think later in this conversation we'll talk about the fact that it takes so long that most pesticide decisions are late. They are overdue by years, because the agency goes through in such detail that they do not meet the deadlines that industry, is sort of, given, for decisions. Um, and that's of
That's
great
a
frustration to the industry.
Well,
But
maybe
yeah.
we can transition to that very point because you had mentioned PREA a couple of minutes ago, Alex, and for our listeners who may be less familiar, PREA is an acronym for Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, and is that part of the law that imposes an application fee for registrants or registrant wannabes and deadlines for EPA to process the application that imposes the fee. There are two components, at least, to this. One is the administrative side. How is EPA implementing the program? And we're looking at a deadline for the current PREA provision to be extended to October of 2027, next year. I am sure this is a big priority for you, Alex, and your team at CLA, working with PREA both legislatively and administratively to improve the turnaround time, help EPA make these decisions, and get some of these programs or the PREA program back on track with regard to meeting deadlines. Because commercially, having a deadline is a very important goal for business community to have something to look to be, operational by a date certain and to meet growing seasons and so on and so forth. But maybe you can share with our listeners what are some of the ideas that Crop Life is putting forward on both the administrative side to assist EPA, because you work closely with your colleagues at OPP, and on the legislative side to right the ship, as it were.
Mhm. Well, yes. So there's a coalition of, um, trade associations that work with companies that register products with the EPA. So everything from antimicrobial products to, biological products, biopesticide products to, conventional products, conventional chemistry, all of the and to re-registration. All of those, have to go through, different parts of the pesticide office. And you are correct, Lynn. So, based on what you're doing, whether you're bringing a brand new, never seen before molecule to the market, and you come in the door with it and you file your application, you will pay the highest of fees and wait the longest of times for a brand new molecule. If you are taking perhaps a label that already exists to use a product, say, on strawberries, and you would like to amend that label and use it on also on raspberries. That would be a lower fee and a shorter timeline.
Mhm.
But regardless, PREA is essentially the law, and we're at PREA 5, which means there's been 5 of them, that governs a set of fee tables, how much the companies will pay, and it's generally about a third of the amount that is estimated to cost to do the work by the federal government, and then a timeline. And the view is based on sort of an FDA concept that, companies would have some certainty, but not a certainty that you get a yes, just a certainty that you
Get a
get an answer.
decision. Right.
Right, you get a decision. What's happened now is that due to, underfunding on the congressional side. So the companies pay their fees, that's one third, but the other two thirds has to come from congressional appropriations. And the independent estimate it is that the authorizers have said that the pesticides office needs $166 million annually to run efficiently. Um, Historically, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, the pesticide office has only received about $130,000 from Congress. $130 million, excuse me, from Congress. So that's a $30 million shortfall. Um, and so that um, shortfall from the authorization from Congress is resulting in delays of 1 to 2 years for most PREA registrations. Now yeah, that's a lot.
That's a
And
lot.
it is, and what it means is that, um, a product that I've gone to a lot of, farm shows where, companies and farmers are interacting, and it'd be like anything. I guess if you were going to a home show, right, and you're redoing your home and you're super excited, right? You see this new roofing tile that's coming out. It's like just, incredibly energy efficient and water repellent, the best roof ever. And you're like, well, when's this tile going to be available for my new roof? And they say, it's coming to the market in 2026. And you're like, great, I'm going to put off my roofing project. I mean, my roof is leaking now, but I think I can wait another year. I'll just put a few buckets out and and I'll wait for your special new roofing tile. But the roof approver regulator, well, they missed their deadline and the roofing tile is now, well, doesn't look like it's coming till maybe 28, 29. Well, now your roof is caving in, right? Now, that's maybe a really bad example, but that's essentially what's happening is at these farm shows, farmers are going around, they've got weed and pest and disease problems, and they're seeing that there's the potential for these new products coming, and they are really excited, and they're like, "What's the projection that they're gonna be on the market?" And the companies are cautious. I mean, they have all the disclaimers everywhere. The lawyer in me is happy to see them. They'll have the disclaimer, pending approval by EPA, pending registration with the states, all these pendings. But they'll say, we hope we'll have it for you next growing season or in 2 growing seasons or 3 growing seasons. And the growers get excited about that. And when it doesn't come, essentially what growers are doing is they're facing resistance, they're facing increasing pest pressure. But here's one that's often lost. They are competing with farmers in other countries because the companies that I work with are global. And so they will register these products not only in the United States, but they will go register them in Canada and Australia and Japan and Brazil and Argentina. And I could keep naming other countries. And these other countries are a little bit faster. And so if we are growing, say, um, soybeans in the United States and they're growing soybeans in Brazil, and there's a soybean fungus and the soybean fungus fungicide is registered in Brazil. Well, those Brazilian growers have access to it, and the American growers do not. So our growers will not be able to fight the fungus that might be the very same fungus that the Brazilians are facing. And that's just an example to show you that it's not just about having access to the newest product, but it's also about being globally competitive. And if you open up
Exactly.
the news, um, you just read every day how much strain and stress the agricultural economy is under in the United States, and giving farmers options is what we really want them to have. It's a lot of choices. They may choose to pick proven chemistry that's been on the market for a long time and works very well. You can think of going into um, the grocery store and you could pick a brand name um, headache relief medication, or you could pick the supermarket brand headache relief
Mhm.
medication. It could have the same active ingredient. Some people really want that brand name. Some people are like, "Hey, I'll take the generic. It's $2 cheaper." Uh, my headache goes away either way. Some people are like, "My headache does not go away unless I buy the brand name," right? It However it works, it's about giving the farmers choices because every dollar they spend is a dollar that's not going back into their family.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, I would imagine some of these issues are very familiar to you when you were assistant administrator. PREA has changed a lot. At least there is an expectation of some certainty as to when a decision will be issued, perhaps not always on time and on budget, but it's an improvement. Would you agree, Jim?
Well, sure. I mean, I was there when the birthing of the maintenance fee program and the '88 amendments. I
Mhm.
mean, and helped Lugar's office at the time, develop the first maintenance fee, so called, that helped pay for the program. And then PREA came up, and we were working on ideas, and that eventually became the first PREA, PREA one, in terms of what kind of dollars did it make sense, and back to what Alex has already described it, one-third of the cost was the estimate. So EPA actually went through and said, well, how much time does it take, for example, a PhD reviewer toxicologist to evaluate a health study of a certain kind of animal cancer studies, for example, and that takes so much time, and it's less time for something back to your analogy or example, I should say, Alex, of raspberries to strawberries is an easier transition to do, if we know what the world of strawberries looks like and strawberry consumption, FDA's got other data they give to EPA about strawberry consumption versus raspberry consumption. That's part of that exhaustive review. EPA actually has an idea of what the various diets are for everybody, and not just for the average person, but people that are vegetarians compared to people that are young and eat a lot of whatever characterization you want to say that young people eat versus older people eat. They have all kinds of demographic slicing and dicing of the data. And that's all part that EPA has to review. Back to your question now, Lynn, that how much work does it go into it, and then how much should the fee be? So it's much, much more sophisticated. And at the same time, one of the fundamental choke points are the broad governmental dynamic. That's a polite way of saying the budget cuts. um, Alex, you mentioned how Congress,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be, if EPA didn't get that amount of money, the whole system would blow up. But Congress just says, no, we'll take that part of the law. As part of this appropriations bill, we're going to say we don't need to do that. Well, they're Congress. I used to describe that one of my earlier jobs again as laws are us, right? That's what Congress is kind of one of their mottos that they don't talk about so much. But anyway, so they just make the law say that we don't need to give you that extra $30 million. Well, you kind of do to get the output. Yes, I'm not saying you have to, that it's some kind of evil thing. It's just sort of, there's going to be a consequence to those shortfalls. And that's part of what Alex has described, with taking a whole lot longer than it was expected to. In addition to, there's things that come up in the data. And EPA's review may say we have this additional question. And again, you don't get your ticket punched. You don't get to market till EPA's regulators are happy, are
Right.
satisfied, and feel that they have complied with the law.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim, because, doing as much work as I do in the TSCA program, I hear the same issues. It's not as though you can just give the agency a big chunk of change. Some of the vagaries of the process are a direct result of the quality and the thoroughness of the scientific reviews. If the data move a reviewer in a different direction, it will take longer.
Yep.
And some of it also, and I know, Alex, you spend a lot of time educating your members and others to submit quality registration applications, because if a registration application is not up to snuff or it is misdirected in one way, shape, or form, that's going to delay the process and impose burdens not just on the system, but on the reviewers at EPA and on the pesticide community writ large. So it's more than just a paucity of resources. It's a complex program, and I think the entire agrochemical community is working hard to work with EPA to fix some of these issues, to get better and more money, and improve IT systems, because that's a big part of the industrial chemical program also. Some of the CDX programs are just not as up to date as we would hope, but it's coming along, and everybody shares a vision to improve the process, get quality programs and products to market, and assist growers in producing high quality and high yield food, period.
And I think at
Well,
this point in the broadcast, Lynn, is when we insert a sort of like YouTube, we're gonna insert a commercial because that also means you may need a consultant, a consulting firm. Now, we are one of those, among many. We're
We're
not
one of many,
one
right?
of many, but this is why you might need a consultant to figure out the best way to do a really good application up front to then move through that
Well,
process. But
my point
then
is that it's a
that's the end
shared
of the video
responsibility.
message. You can hit skip now on your screen,
yeah.
even though this is a podcast. So, but go ahead.
Well, it is true, I have to say. I didn't see many people make it through the EPA process, without a consultant because isn't that what they say even about, like, the IRS? Like, what does it say about our system that you have to have a consultant help you? But unless you, like, have one W-2 and that's all you're filing, that's
Right.
probably the only way you can do your tax return without any extra help, right? Because
Exactly
it gets
right.
pretty darn complicated pretty quickly, and same at the pesticide office, and I was just gonna add, what's making it even more complicated is the globalization of chemistry, right? The definitions are changing all over the world. Europe defines something as a PFAS pesticide. The US doesn't. Then there's confusion. Why does Europe say it is? Why do we say it isn't? Or we hear something is, quote, banned in another country, but why are we still using it in the US? Well, then we find out it's really not banned in the other country because what they did was prohibit its use and then make an exception to allow it to continue to be used because there was no alternative. So and this is happening all over, and that actually those policy questions can end up even after the science questions are resolved by the scientists, as Lynn is talking about, or and the PhDs have reached their conclusion, you can still have a case kind of stall out on just a bigger like, are we ready as an administration or as the EPA to take this step and say, we're going to do something different than the EU? Are we going to do something different? Now, we do in the US. We are a risk based system, other countries are hazard based. But with the MAHA, maybe tying back a little to our earlier conversation, some of that has come to the forefront. Why are we risk based? Is that should we be hazard based? And the answer is no, we should not be hazard based because if we were hazard based, none of us would be driving our cars either, or walking across the street, or doing many other things that have inherent risks to them. We manage risks and we manage them well through all sorts of modern agricultural technologies. But those global policy questions, I think, are also contributing to some of the delays that we're seeing. Is there's um, less of a stomach by policymakers or legislators to take that next step and say, all right, we're going ahead.
Let's pivot to trade and tariff. That's been a
That's an
very
easy one.
much
Yeah.
big, speaking of globalization, Alex, that's a huge issue. In your view, how much of the pesticide industry has been affected by just those two issues, trade and tariff?
Well, we have a very, very active trade and tariff committee. And so I will tell you, we are affected by it. We are watching it. It has created a lot of uncertainty in that most pesticides are formulated here in the United States, creating jobs, and that is good. But many of the ingredients are sourced globally from many countries. And so they are entering the ports, they are being subject to tariffs. Um, Information from the USDA through 2025 and into early 26 is that crop protection chemistry pricing was largely flat, meaning there were no spikes in pricing because of the tariffs. But there were also publicly available articles that discuss the fact that the companies were were absorbing a lot of those costs early on. What the question that remains now is whether the companies can continue to absorb those costs as the tariff uncertainty goes into 2026. We're now 4 months in. So, it's one thing for a year for a company to say, all right, we're going to sort of try to absorb this volatility around our active ingredient supply or our ingredient supply. But it's another thing to continue to do that over multiple years. And there is certainly pressure from the administration to what they call nearshore, friendshore, or bring all of the manufacturing back to the United States. Those are conversations that um, I think are being had by many industries, and they are difficult conversations given that, how many decades have we spent globalizing manufacturing? And now, it would be almost like a reverse engineering to bring it all back home. And siting chemical plants could be a challenge.
Very
Um,
challenging, yeah.
so I would say, Lynn, to answer your question, we want to open markets to agriculture and we want a level playing field in trade. And we want agricultural chemicals recognized as critical inputs for the agricultural food system. And, this is affecting us. And the tariffs, by our estimate, could cost $1.23 billion. Um, we are concerned. We don't want that cost to be passed on to growers, ultimately, because
Sure.
they are already under, as I mentioned, great stress and great strain. So there's no easy answer here, but we are wanting to be a part of every single conversation around trade and tariffs in agricultural chemicals.
Jim, any thoughts to offer given your perch as a government consultant?
It's I obviously there's other economics and all kinds of other analysis about the numbers, and that's obviously very, very important, as Alex just said about the cost. What I find interesting about globalization, and especially in the regulatory role, is that, for example, one of the things I've always tried to do, back to the education function, is, well, how many studies does EPA require? And it's X. It's a good estimate, somewhere around 100, give or take. Whether it's, again, back to the simplest kind of question, 120 plus if you really go with the full Monty and, food uses and other kinds of things. And then talking to some company folks and they go, well, that's nothing. And because, we'll end up doing 150, 200 studies because we know if not today, even if it's going to be initially introduced in the US, it's going to end up being in all those markets Alex mentioned, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and other places. That's certainly, again, not an exhaustive list of the world, to say the least. And so we'll end up having to do all those studies, and we end up doing that as we project the lifeline of the life, call it lifespan of a product as a marketer. It pays to do those up front, so we can go to and then one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years is joint reviews. So you might have a chemical joint review by Canada and US together because those two markets will interchange, those two countries interchange work to do the review. And then those two markets are be able, ideally, to be both approved at the same time. And that's not to mention Europe, this place called Europe, which is a pretty big, big dog in the game, number one. And then number two, potential markets, or South America, or Asia, and so on and so forth. So the amount of data that gets generated is huge. And the other thing, part of the fail-safe stop kind of points in the pesticide regulatory system is, and if any of that data shows that there's a problem that was unexpected, that has to be submitted to EPA. And so that's just another one of the checks and balances, even internally, that you've made a good decision and the basis of that decision to begin with. So again, the globalization has helped lead to lots of studies, lots of further, data coming in and being made available then to EPA if they need it.
Right. Well, I'd like to, if you are both willing to pivot to another really, really big topic in the ag space, and that's the Endangered Species Act implementation measures. And one aspect of ESA implementation is probably not completely clear to our listeners, and that is label instructions for ag users are getting much more detailed, longer, and more complicated. One thought that might be helpful to expand upon, Alex, is what is industry, and in particular CLA, doing to help educate users, growers, and others in the community to expect and deal with some of these longer label instructions, all to accommodate, critical habitat protections that are a consequence of Endangered Species Act implementation measures by EPA?
Well, that's a great question, Lynn. And when I got here 2 years ago, March 24, ESA, what everyone had just like these giant eyes about the ESA, particularly farmers, like, oh my goodness, it's going to happen like a tsunami. And I think the best thing that has happened is through the development of the herbicide strategy, the insecticide strategy, and then soon the rodenticide strategy, and I guess the fungicide strategy is coming out this month, right?
Mhm.
Um, we now understand much better how EPA is moving forward to implement the ESA, and all new registrations are including the ESA requirements. And we have, I believe, there's about 5 to 7 labels that currently have Endangered Species Act language on them. So not a tsunami, actually very bite size. So what we've been able to
Good.
do is create resources. We have videos on our website at croplifeamerica.org/ESA. And there, we did videos with Dr. Stanley Culpepper from the University of Georgia, who you could listen to for hours if you like a great Southern accent. He's a fifth generation farmer, and he talks in just plain farmer language about read your label, how it works. He talks about ESA 101. He talks about runoff. He talks about drift management. And we did that in partnership with the ag retailers and CPDA, the producers and distributors of agrotechnology. We also have a flow chart of how to read a pesticide label, um, got it on one page, and then we have a slide deck that could be used anywhere, so like an ESA 101. So with those resources, what we've really said is read your label. And the biggest
Mhm.
question we get is someone going to come after me as a farmer and bring some kind of Endangered Species Act enforcement action if I kill a endangered weed or insect? And we say that's highly unlikely, although I'm not giving legal advice at the moment, but it's unlikely. What is more likely is that you would have a FIFRA violation for not following your label. And so you need to do things like check bulletins live too, 6 months before application. Make sure if your label has ESA language on it, and again, there's only 5 or 6 to 7 labels right now that do, check, follow, do the things it says. The one thing that I have picked up on is there's a section of every label right now that has been given ESA language that says Endangered Species Act requirements. It would be really nice if that part of the label had all the Endangered Species Act requirements in one place, but that is not the case. Um, Usually, that part of the label talks about checking bulletins live too and a few other things, but you have to look all over the label for other requirements like drift and runoff. Maybe you need to use an adjuvant. Maybe you need to manage runoff. And it does not tell the label doesn't tell you if that requirement is there because you should be managing runoff because of the product. Maybe the product has it shouldn't be reaching water. Or maybe the product has a drift issue and you need to use an adjuvant. It doesn't tell you that it's there for ESA or if it's there for product stewardship, right? Because those requirements are all over the label, which is why it's really better to just go back to the grower or whoever's advising them and say, just follow your label. Don't look for something that screams ESA, 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 because it's kind of getting worked in all over the label.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
nothing's going to just jump out and say, EPA put this here because of the Endangered Species Act. Like,
Right.
a few things might say that, but not everything. So bottom line, follow the label. The label's always the law, and I think growers understand that. And again, the real boots on the ground of this are your your applicators, your crop
Mhm.
consultants, your extension agents. It's not really the pesticide companies that are going to be doing that education. It's the people that interact with those farmers on a day-to-day basis and give them advice on a day-to-day basis. The people who are their trusted advisors are still going to be their trusted advisors. That's generally not the people from whom they procure or who manufacture the chemicals.
Right.
So we
Right.
just urge them to talk to whoever they typically talk to get good advice about how to apply things on their farm.
Well, yeah, and including the land grants, of course, your local
Yeah,
extension and all kinds of people. But just to follow up a little bit on that, the predicate, as you say, there's a lot of things on a label to protect health and the environment beyond endangered species. That's why it's all over the map. And again, I agree that figuring a way to kind of have it all in one place. But the reason it's not in some level, given how you described it, is well, you want to prevent offsite migration from soil mobility or drift or whatever it is, aerial drift or otherwise through the soil movement and things, or water through the soil movement stuff. And so you end up with all kinds of requirements because long before ESA and the ESA program, EPA had requirements to prevent aerial drift or
right.
other offsite movement through water or whatever it is. And so those are all part of those requirements. And the endangered species program and has come an incredibly long way in the past 10 years, especially through some of the things done in the last 5 or 6, led by the Jake Lee. We got to give Jake Lee a shout out because he was a DAA, political DAA under Mr. Biden in order to really get this whipped into shape. And then all the work that goes into it by all the people at EPA, the EFED people and others. So I don't want to make it sound like it was just Jake working really hard with a pen. But it was a whole bunch of work by a whole bunch of people to figure this out. Finally, because this on paper, this has been a requirement, should have been a requirement at some level for 40 years. We did some back when in the 90s. But again, it's so much different and so much more. And the whole idea is to prevent offsite movement to help people, to help, plant nearby plants, whether they're endangered or not. You want to
Exactly.
minimize some of that. And that's what that data review is about. That's what the data requirements are about. And that's why then the particular emphasis on endangered species is that per the requirements of that law, uh, to be integrated with FIFRA, but at the same time, it's not like FIFRA never thought of this to begin with, or FIFRA protections never worried about aerial drift, soil mobility, and other kinds of things.
So Jim, I think you put it well. It's like FIFRA, and I've said this in talks. EPA did a species analysis, always an ecosystem analysis, an environmental and species study. This was done before. It just wasn't compliant with the requirements of consultation under the ESA. But those requirements are in there, and so now they are able to sort of serve two functions, right? They're able to show that ESA. They're doing the ESA consultation by going over to Fish and Wildlife and to the services and getting their work consulted. But those
Well,
requirements are in there, and they check both boxes now.
and there is such sea changes between the interaction of the services and EPA staff and all that for a lot of reasons, a lot of history, and that's another 12 podcast, for another time and place. But
Right.
um, there's so much background on that. But again, they're working much more together to say, mutual interests of both the program, again, the pesticide program seeking to reduce or minimize any offsite movement generally, but then in addition with the emphasis on, well, are there nearby species, threatened and endangered species nearby that could be then subject to potential harm as a result of pesticide use? And that's been the additional work. That's what the last 5 and 6 years of work has been about and has come a long way.
That's great.
Alex, we're going to ask you to take your crystal ball out and give us your thoughts on kind of the evolution of pest control and food production. Technologies are always evolving, and farming now is way more than just a tractor and Miracle Grow, right? It's drones and computers and high tech everything. So what do you and your members see in the future with regard to pest control technologies and food production writ large?
Oh, I Lynn, you have hit where we are headed, right? I This future for agriculture is going to align with the MAHA movement. It's going to align with where growers wanna go in managing their use, and maybe meeting the consumer who wants to say, "Well, if you're gonna use, chemicals on my food crops? Can you use less?" Right? All of this precision agriculture is going to help us with putting the product where it needs to go in a more focused manner, right? And then we have our drones and our robotics, which are going to address, perhaps, I have heard, over time, some of the ability of the workforce limitations, right?
Right.
I recently heard a presentation that there is a drone robot um, well, I don't know if there's such a thing as a drone robot, but well, let's say it's a robot that can pick grapes without damaging the fruit. Now, we have workforce issues. We also have, work hours limitations. But I think that robot likes to just work all as long as his or her charge lasts.
Right.
And so, if that robot
24/7.
can keep picking grapes all night long, well, maybe that would be, quite an intriguing, twist for, farm labor where we don't have enough, human labor, and we use our human labor for the really refined tasks, that we need. The drones, I think we are very supportive of drones. One of the issues, I guess, to wrap this up is that, this is exciting. This is going to We are working very closely with AEM, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, to update labels so that labels allow the use of some of these innovative tools. For example, and Jim might remember this, that some labels are written around the daylight hours, like activities can occur during daylight. Well, we now have equipment that can run on a solar charge all night long. We hadn't contemplated that when the labels were written. We also are working with AEM on accuracy studies. So if we say that a drone or precision piece of equipment can apply with an accuracy of whatever percent on, we have to demonstrate that, as Jim has emphasized, through all of the studies and all the documentation, so that EPA can say this product can be applied using a traditional sprayer or a precision sprayer and must achieve. Maybe the label should be written with the we don't specify how it's applied, but we want to specify the result we want. We want it applied with this level of accuracy or this level of precision, and then let the grower choose how they achieve that, right? So there are a lot of different ways to think about how we integrate this exciting future of modern agriculture, which is the newest pillar in CropLife's strategic plan. Nobody makes an exciting podcast talking about their strategic plan, so I'm going to stop on that. But we added building awareness of modern agriculture to our strategic plan as our newest pillar, and we only have three, which means it's
No,
really up
it's
there.
huge.
Yeah, because we just think that it's part of this. We're not out there with a pitchfork anymore, tilling the land. This is really
No, it's very high tech now.
high tech, and the data and AI is gonna transform how we apply chemistry, how we use chemistry, and how growers grow.
And, along with that, I mean, you're gonna see, over time, right, we because of regulatory standards and regulatory concerns, there's been a move over time to much lower volume application rates on the land and on the crop. If you have less applied to the crop, you then have less residue potential, as well as other techniques to reduce the crops of, the too many residues in the crops that then may be what people get exposed to when they eat the food. And that's all part of the soup of what all that data that EPA is reviewing and calculating and all kinds of things. At the same time, with the newer technologies, if you have I think in my head, the robot tractor or the robot arm of the tractor that now with AI, brought to you by Mr. Musk or whoever, that's going to be able to identify the particular what you and I or any of us may look at and see a green little spot of green on the field, but they're going to know because they're so smart that it's a weed versus not a weed or some other thing that doesn't matter. It's not the target pest. And so you can apply a very spot amount. So even if the old label said something like, 12 ounces an acre to treat an acre, which is pretty phenomenal if you think about it, you might end up with EPA being able to accept a valid estimate. It's only going to be half of that amount to control an acre's worth of potential pests on a crop. And so that means that you've got, again, reduced exposure, and then that'll back calculate all through the system to say there's less exposure and less risk to the consumer at the end of the day, or less risk to the environment, because again, there's just going to be less applied to the area in question. And so that's some of the exciting techniques that's going to further reduce exposure. Further innovations about potential risk, hazard of the product to begin with reduces risk. All those things are ongoing, and that's something that's been happening for decades, ever since whatever you want to put the marker at. Silent Spring, the 72 Act, the 88 amendments, the beloved FQPA, speaking personally, or whatever it is that you've got these increasing toughening of the regulations and restrictions, because that's what the public demands, and you got to meet that demand. And so as a regulator or as a company, and that's the evolution that's just continuing with some of this quote high tech AI, the future, whatever else you want to
Well,
characterize it as.
and that's why, just coming back to the timeliness of EPA decisions, I think why we care so much about the timelines is that the new products that are coming out are gonna be exciting, and, we wanna see them reach the market so that growers have the option to choose them. Again, they may choose existing products, and again, it's about them having a full toolbox of EPA-approved pesticides.
So, Alex, I know we're running short on time, but I wanted to at least see if you wanted to comment on the forthcoming oral argument in the Durnell v. Monsanto case. That's the question whether state failure to warn claims or warnings with regard to potential health implications of, in this case, glyphosate, are preempted by FIFRA. The preemption issue has been rolling around for literally decades. And so I, for one, am very much looking forward to the April 27th oral argument. The case will probably be decided this June, but at the end of the term, has major implications. I'm sure CropLife has been involved in the case and certainly monitoring. Just wanted to know if you had any comments on the case and on the issue of preemption writ large.
Absolutely. This is a top issue for us. We filed an amicus, and
Mhm.
uh, I hope I see you in line that morning, Lynn. We're gonna have to get there very early. I want to go to the
Very
oral
early.
argument.
I might opt for listening up, but
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Hopefully, it'll be not too cold, and we'll stand on the steps and get into the limited seating there. But yes, we are so pleased the court has decided to hear this case, and we definitely believe that EPA has the authority to assess and regulate the safety and labeling of pesticides under the federal law, and that consistent labeling across states is critical.
essential,
And
yeah.
yeah, we want to be there to watch the argument. We, though, will not be the only ones there. The MAHA movement
Mhm.
is organizing a bus rally to the Supreme Court that day. It might be the first bus rally to the Supreme Court for a FIFRA case in history.
Wow.
It's called the People versus Poison event, and you can sign up online to ride the bus from a number of U.S. locations. So it's going to be quite a morning on the Supreme Court steps with that going on. So, wow, that's all I have to say. It's going to be
All the more
insane.
reason to get there early, Alex, to beat the crowd. So
Bring your sleeping bag, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's eh, again, it comes back to this sort of misunderstanding of FIFRA and pesticides where we started, right? People versus poison. And this is about consistent labeling in the EPA and FIFRA, and I don't think the word poison's anywhere in the case.
No, it's just the world is not binary. It's not people or poisons. It's so
it's
much
one
more
of the
complicated
reasons.
than that.
Remember, the archaic term for pesticides is economic poisons, and of course we left that behind a long time ago in the 40s. But anyway, that's what they used to be called back under the statutes and things. Anyway, again, showing my historian FIFRA history chops. So sorry for
Well, you bring the sign for that says economic poisons, Jim, and you can stand with the bus people.
Last question, Alex. You've been very generous with your time, but you are a leader of endless brilliance, optimism, energy. No, really, Alex, just admire your career so much. You've been on both sides of the aisle as assistant administrator of the Toxics Division at EPA, EPA Region 1 administrator. You're now CEO and president of Crop Life. Before you accepted the gig, I mean, you must have thought about how it would play out. You're 2 years into this now. Are you having fun? Is it everything that you expected it to be and more? What can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you, well, first, I am delighted that I have the opportunity to lead this organization. I am having fun. It is a fun role because I feel well supported by the membership and the team here. The staff is incredible,
Yeah.
and also the partnerships. Um, I really find the partnerships with the grower community and the specialty community to be just so rewarding, because it is a challenging area that we work in, but when you are surrounded by other people who say, "No, we need these products, and we're gonna talk about why we need them," and I encourage, your listeners to visit our website,
Uh-huh.
farmervoicesmatter.org, where we have a whole campaign around farmers talking about why they use pesticides. Because I think back earlier in the conversation we talked about, it's one thing for the innovation companies and the formulators and distributors of pesticides to talk about what we do, but it's another thing when a farmer who raises their family and lives on the land and applies these chemistries can say, "This is why I use them. This is how responsibly I use them. This is how I steward my land. This is I'm here with my father, my mother, my uncle, my brother, my sister, my cousin, my grandkids." And when you hear those first-hand stories, they are so moving. I played them for my mother this weekend, who's 86. I think after the 4th or 5th video, she might have had enough, but I love watching these farmer stories. Um, and so I say it is a fun role because of the partnerships. I had 1 pair of, farm boots before this job. I now have 2.
Do
So
you really?
yeah, and they're both really dirty. So I think that
You're in
shows
the field a
that
lot.
I'm out in the field,
Yeah.
and that's a good sign. So dirty boots and great partners make for a great job.
Well, and great people make for great leaders, Alex, and you are just top of the heap in my book. You've been so generous with your time.
Thank you.
I hope our
You
listeners
and Jim are
appreciate
great partners.
the complexity of your job and how much you bring to it. I want to thank you and Jim for a wonderful conversation. We covered a lot of real estate. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much, Jim, Alex, for being here today.
sure, pleasure.
Hey. Thank you, and thank you, Jim, for all your wisdom on all things. You make light of your historic knowledge, but it comes in incredibly handy very often. And Lynn, you know I think you're a rock star. So, um, just
I
thanks.
appreciate that, Alex. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Talk to everybody soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
My thanks again to Alex Dunn and Jim Aidala for speaking with me today about agricultural policy, trade, MAHA, and so much more. All Things Chemical is produced by Jackson Bierfeld at Bierfeld Audio, LLC. We will be back again soon to further inform and entertain you about all things chemical. Bye-bye.